right, and Abigail, you should feel free to start anytime.
Great. Thank you, Aaron. All right, I will call to order tonight's retreat of the ISD 191 Burnsville Egan Savage School Board. The date is May 7th, 2020, and the time is 5:30. I'd like to start by welcoming those who have joined us tonight. As you know, our work continues even virtually, so thanks for taking time to join us. We will start tonight talking about budget documentation. Let me pull it up. Basically, the goal here is to finalize the budget document so that we all know what to expect to see when we adopt the budget in June. And overall, the goals of this conversation are to continue to ensure transparency with our community and with our staff, and also provide clarity in terms of how 80% of our budget, which represents our people, how 80% of our budget is distributed across the district. So board members, what we have tonight are 4 different documents. Basically, report A is provides a summary district-wide of all the different staff and the breakdown of their representation within the budget. And then the second document is a new document that was created to, again, provide that transparency and clarity, looking specifically at the proposed budget book document, which represents the salary spread across our largest bargaining unit. And what I'm asking today really is the new document, the new report. Do we believe that that provides us the clarity and transparency that we were hoping for? And then second to that is addressing how we want to look at staffing within the budget units. And that's, do we want to look at staffing by FTE, or is it important to see the individual staff member's salary? So I will open it up for conversation first in terms of that new document and what folks think. And I'll just ask you to use the raising your hand raised feature in the Zoom program. Are there any comments or questions about that document? Leslie.
Yep. So just for clarification, so we have report A, report B, and then you have the adopted budget book. So you're asking our feedback on the adopted budget book first?
I'm looking for okay, let's start with report A.
Yeah, I actually like report A because I like that it's summarized. I think the only thing I'd want maybe to add to it would be kind of maybe an average salary. So like how it's averaged per group, you know, so like what would be the average salary within each of those subgroups? You know, and then
the same.
You know, so I liked, you know, like that we have a sum of the FTEs and like the total salary with benefits and the percentage in the budget component. So I like that it's not named per teacher, you know, either, because I don't know, I just think I think that's maybe a little too transparent. But I think this is transparent enough.
Okay. I see Darcy has her hand up.
Yep. So I think the only thing I would change on this, I like this very much. We're really giving some good information to to the general public. And I guess in light of the general public seeing this document, the first column titled "The Sum of FTE." FTE is it might be an acronym or something that the general public might not understand that means just number of people, like FTE means a single employee or something like that. So some title that makes it clear that this is the number of positions or something like that.
That's a good suggestion. Yeah, those acronyms can sometimes be confusing. Let's see, Scott.
I agree with Leslie's suggestion about the averages. I do just want to clarify, though, that if I'm not mistaken, individual salaries are public record. So even if we don't include them in our budget report, those are still publicly available, correct?
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
Everything is public.
That's what I thought. Wanted to double check.
Let's see. Darcy, is your hand up again, or is that from before?
Sorry, I forgot to take it down. Take it down again.
Eric.
I think you can take it down. I'm not sure if I can.
You can. There's a you hit raise hand before. There's an option to lower hand.
Let's see. I don't
so
have that.
I think you just hit raise hand again, actually, and it goes away. But
Oh, there. Yeah.
so, we've talked about this a number of times, and I think we have elements of the right answers here. I still think we're missing some pieces. So just kind of assembling all of them together. I understand the desire and probably that it would be unnecessary to publish individual records with names on them. I'm not driving for that, but again, very clear to Scott's point, that is open public information. Whether we have it out there in a meeting or someone comes and asks for it, it is available. But having said that, the report A is nice, except that, I think that there needs to be, again, to Darcy's point, FTE is an ambiguous term, or a term that not, unless you work around HR, you don't know what that means, full-time employee. There's other acronyms in here, VPK/CE, where 1% of our salary is going towards, salaries are going towards, many people may not know what that means. Confidential, that's just probably going to spark questions rather than answer questions. So I think there needs to be a little bit of a combing over this with the eye of the audience that's going to be intercepting it. I understand the desire for an average, and I would agree with it. I had specifically requested that, and we get a little bit into this in the proposed budget book document, where there's a breakdown of the steps and ladders. But again, people are not going to typically understand really what that means. And what I really, really want to see is a breakdown of what percentage of our salaries are at what ends of that scale of those tables. So it's one thing to know that in 2021, our top end teacher with a master's degree would earn, and 20 years of service would earn $98,140. And then an entry level teacher with a BA would come in at $40,950. But I think it's important for people to know that I'm just making these numbers up, 25% of our teachers are in steps 1 through 4, for instance, or 1 through 3, and or whatever it is, because that's more than an average. That's understanding where the groupings are is going to be very important for people. It lets you quickly take away, what, we don't have a lot of junior teachers in our district. We have a ton of very senior teachers. I don't know. I'm again, those are not statements. Those are just hypothetical examples. But that's what I would like to see, is some breakdown how the spread is throughout the steps and lanes, and maybe even a brief text box that just explains what steps and lanes are and how they applicable, with the emphasis on the point that steps and lanes are progressed annually, regardless, for the most part, regardless of performance. You will progress
So,
through steps and lanes.
Can I ask you a question?
Yep.
Just for
Yep.
clarification. And so we've flipped now, and we'll go back to the first document, but I've clearly come back to this. Looking at the proposed budget documents, I see FTEs, and maybe Teresa can clarify those FTEs within each of the steps and lanes. Those are the number of people within each step and within each lane,
Mhm.
right?
Looking
Yes,
at page 2, I believe,
that
right? of
was
the
my-
document?
Yeah, point of clarification. So Director Miller, you want percentages. So it tells you how many are in each one. So the greatest numbers are in,
Are you talking about page 2 with the 2 columns and all of the different steps there? And
the
I
proposed
maybe the
budget
information
book
on
doc.
yes, but page 2 of that.
Looking in board book, it's labeled, it's an attachment in board book labeled proposed budget book documents, and it's
Mhm.
one column is labeled steps 1 through 10, and the second column is labeled steps 11 through 20.
And that's on page 2 of that document. And I understand that potentially what I am saying in its raw form, that's there.
Yep.
I would like that summarized. That is not a very approachable way of looking at the evidence. I would have to do some math to figure out, or just, whatever. I'd like to know where the majority of the, I'd like to see a spread with some dispersed spread with representation of where we're heavy with our teachers and where they are in the steps and lanes.
So basically, within each of those lanes, the percentage that the people in that lane represent of the total.
Well, I mean, if I had this raw data, this would take me probably a couple of hours, if less than that. I would make up, and this is totally up to the person doing the work, but I would probably just take some segmentation of it and figure out kind of 4 or 5 buckets, and then dump everybody into, depending on how they fall, into those buckets and represent that in, a chart or something,
Okay.
a bar chart or something that shows kind of how it disperses out.
Got
It
it.
doesn't have to be this granular is what I'm trying to say. Do some segmentation of the data to make it a little bit more presentable at an executive level.
Yeah, and I agree with Eric. I also think it needs some sort of narrative, because you need to be able to drive what people are going to be seeing, because I think people can interpret things differently from what they see. So until we actually explain a little more what is there, I think there needs to be, like, sentences or a paragraph or 2, or like something that helps people read what we're trying to explain or demonstrate there.
So looking, for example, at step 20, the narrative would say something to the effect that the most seasoned, the group of teachers that have been here the most
Yeah.
account for 17.8 million.
Right.
Yeah, or it could be like, well, I mean, this is the columns it doesn't line up for a page, but it could be like under, the one column where it says steps 1 through 10, that could be kind of a summation paragraph of what they're seeing in what steps 1 to 10 mean. And then 11 through 20. And then FT, I believe, means full-time equivalent, because not everybody's a full-time employee.
Yes. And then it's standard in Lisa's documents of the board book. She provides a narrative. If you look, there's always a narrative and an explanation.
I think that's a good suggestion, though. I mean, simply putting the data out there doesn't necessarily provide more context and explanation. Okay. Anything well, okay, so anything else on this particular document, since this is where we are?
So I just want to point out, for instance, while we were talking, I quickly, just adding up off that 2-column table, taking the FTEs into the grand total, we have 68% of our staff is 15 years or more senior. And those are the kind of stats I want to see coming out of this information. That's a pretty significant comment on where we are with our staffing levels in our district.
Okay.
I mean, there's positives there. That's longevity. That's experience. We need to be capitalizing on that information.
Okay. So define acronyms, spell out, provide some definitions around the roles, and provide a general summary statement to give a general context of what people are seeing on this particular report. Okay. So then let's go back to report A. Was there anything else? I have average salary and again, defining some of the acronyms. Was there anything else on this, on report A?
I think the only other challenge here is we often hear a lot of chatter about administration, defining administration. I know that's a slippery slope that has a lot of, there's a lot in that. But anyway, so I think, I don't know what to say about that. I want to have a little conversation about what that means. I mean, at first pass, when I look at this, teachers obviously not, educational assistants are not. So we're at what is 79%, custodial not. So we're well over 80%. That definitively is not administration. But then, so I don't know if we want to highlight things that would be classified as administration or not. Then that could be done with either some color coding or a separate column or something of that nature. I just throw that out for conversation. I don't know, because I know that's how this tool is going to get used, and it's going to, if we don't do it, someone's going to do it, and there's a strong chance they're going to erroneously do it.
That can administer, so can things that these bargaining groups here, is there crossover within any particular bargaining group where they are administration or something else? Or is there a way to put like a subheader, so you have the bargaining group and then you could say like educators or what, direct, service teachers, and so you'd have then underneath it the teachers, educational assistants, and then maybe have and then define the buckets that admin represent, and then and have them below that, and kind of like space it out to kind of break the groups, but have like almost like a subheader within the bargaining group columns versus having to have a whole separate column.
So just defining in that group.
Yeah.
Maybe it's defining it. I agree. Maybe it's defining it. These are the the staff that work in a school building versus the staff that work in Diamond Head, because that's what people say administration. That's what they mean is Diamond Head, not there's too many administrators at my kid's school. It's the central office. So can we show somehow in one of these reports what it actually looks like at the central office? I think
So
that's
there
what Eric and
There's
Yeah.
specific definitions from MDE for administration, so we would use that definition because it aligns with our reporting. And so what I'm hearing is you want to know who's working at DEC. So in the board book, there is a location description. And so it would be a matter of just pulling all the location descriptions. So in the regular adopted budget, you have the location.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
the only thing
agree.
I would challenge about that with the DEC though is that community ed is in there and that they're not admin.
Right.
That's a whole separate thing, you know, and so
Right.
I think we'd have to define what is truly admin, not necessarily what's at Diamond Head, you know, because, you know, you have, you know, what is it called? School, it's not school age childcare, whatever the early
It's
learn, the early,
child,
the
early
early
learning.
one, the kids, yeah, the early learning, that's under, that's at Diamond Head too,
Right,
and that's not
exactly.
admin. So I think it's making sure what we define as admin.
And Dee
Yeah,
Dee is-
and Scott, the challenge, and I understand what you're saying, and you're absolutely right. When people bring that issue up, that is really what they're talking about, is the, you know, for lack of better, the back office or the head office sort of mentality about how things are being. But the challenge is, to Dr. Battle's point, there is an MDE definition, and we try to utilize that because that allows us to compare to other districts. Problem is, the MDE definition does include principals and assistant principals. So those, and what people don't understand when they make that argument is that's a pretty significant chunk of our quote unquote admin bucket. So, you know, when they always talk, so if we were to cut them out and then try to compare, we would look like we'd have dramatically low numbers. And again, there is no way of comparing how many we have in the, to my knowledge, and I've asked about this for years and years now. My knowledge is there's no way of comparing what we have in the sort of the head office versus what Lakeville has in their head office or Prior Lake has in their head office.
Right. It's not apples to apples.
Well,
No.
but to go on that though, I actually think it's illuminating then to actually have principals under the admin subheader then, because then it's really educating the public to see this is what, when we're talking about admin, these are the groups that we're talking about. So it is the principals are part of this team, you know, even though that they are in the school buildings under the MDE definition, this is where they fall. And so when we are talking about that percentage breakdown of the buckets, you know, within our budget, we can be educating more on.
I'll make a point, and then Dee Dee's had her hand up for a while. And to Dr. Battle's point, the location that people work in is already part of the budget book. So it may not be, you know, I'm sure we can, Dr. Battle and her team can work on this for us. But in terms of being clear about where people work, it is in there already. Dee Dee, you had a point?
I simply want to say, if we're still talking about report A, I loved that report. It's the state, the politicians love to make the budget as complex as possible. But the report A sets out as clearly as possible, as we're talking to our public, how our groups of employees, how expensive or what the costs are related to the groups in about as simple a form. When I saw this chart, I was excited because then you can talk to your public about, okay, the principals group, it's 4.41% of, I believe, that percentage related to the what is it, 80% of our budget is people. And of that 80%, 4.41% is the principal's cost. The more we dig into this, also remember, the more we dig into this and want, you know, this stem of information pulled out or this other stem also speaks to who's going to pull that out and how is that going to be reported out. And that means we're asking of our upper level staff to pull that out and make that done. And that means hours of work. Well, that means what isn't going to be done so that that particular report can be done. When I looked at this, you can give this to the public and then they can understand what in our employee group, how much it costs, and they can fairly well understand what those groups are. I also would avoid putting an average salary in there. When I look at, for example, educational assistants, there's different levels of educational assistants, and they do different kinds of work. An average salary really, I don't know if that would be a very descriptive statistics to have in there. Same thing with operations. I mean, I would hesitate to put that average in there. Even in the teachers group, there's such a varied amount of work done by the teachers in our group that an average, I don't know if I'd put that in this chart. This chart is so beautiful. Man, I just about pass it out on the street. I mean, I loved this chart when I saw it. So that's my 2 cents on that particular information. Now I have to figure out how to take my hand down. There, I did it.
You did it. And actually, Dee Dee, you reminded me, probably one of the more complicated groups are those that fall under the unaffiliated policy. We have district level administrators, director level administrators, as well as tech employees.
Indeed.
And cultural liaisons all in that group. And there's such a range.
Yes. Yes.
Eric, you have your hand up.
Yeah, one more thing. I just realized the percent of total over on the far right column is a percent of the total salary and benefits combined. I do think there would be a value to having a percent of total for salary and a percent total for benefits as a column. So for instance, just doing the quick calculator math here, teachers are roughly hover right around that 71%. All right, can you guys hear me? Can you hear me at all?
Mhm. Yeah. Yes, I can.
You can hear me, Abigail?
Yes.
Yes, your video is frozen.
Okay,
I
it
can hear
said
you.
my internet, something came up and said my internet had gone.
Yep.
Okay. All right, very good.
Yep.
So the
Yeah.
salaries and the benefits for teachers, for instance, are roughly around that 71%. In a contrast, the educational assistants, the salary is something around 6.8%, and their proportional use of benefits is about 10%. So I think those adding up percentages there would just be a benefit of some illumination also.
So maybe we consider the percent just of salary and benefits, and as opposed to an average salary for that chart, given the array of realities within each group.
And we're going to define not just the acronyms in the bargaining group column. We're going to explain what unaffiliated and confidential and district-wide mean as well.
Yes, those definitions already
And
exist.
even operations, because operations you'd assume might be, you know, there could be assumptions of what operations is made up of too. And, you know, it's only 3 people, so.
I think we need to define who's in that group. Yeah. Okay. Anything else on report A? Okay. And how about we return to the proposed budget book documents, the last item in that subset of the agenda? Was there anything else? I have defining acronyms, roles, steps, adding a narrative, summary statement. Was there anything else that people wanted to comment on with that particular report? Okay. So then finally, I think the question really is, it comes down, we're looking at the 1920 adopted budget document versus report B. And the difference there is that the 1920 adopted document breaks down staffing by FTE, and report B breaks down staffing by the salary of the individual. And for that particular report, I just wanted to get clarity from you in terms of what we want. Can anybody hear me?
As long as we are doing some sort of the, I could hear you. As long as we're doing some segmentation or demonstration of something more than just, high level, as we've already discussed sort of ad nauseum here, then I'm fine with not showing individual roles and individual positions. That's fine.
Agreed.
Phoebe?
Yeah, I agree. I'm for the just showing the FTE versus the salary.
Okay. And Dee Dee, did
Same
you have
with
your hand
me.
up? Yep. Okay. So we will stick with FTE in that document, given the other new information that will also be included. And just for our audience's sake, this basically what we're talking about is adding new reports to our final adopted budget report. All right, so next, I will turn it over to Dr. Battle. Wanted to have a discussion on board information requests. Dr. Battle.
Thank you. The topic for board information requests, this topic was most urgent several weeks ago. And it was related to the transitioning to the major responsibilities in Governor Walz's first executive order. And that was to provide education through distance learning, continue to educate our students through distance learning, provide meals for children, and provide childcare for those healthcare professionals and those first responders. And at the same time, we still needed to lead and operate a district. And as we now know, it's pretty much virtually. We're doing the day-to-day operations in addition to the two others, the meal distribution for the community as well as the childcare. So several weeks ago, my team and I wanted clarity about how do we adjust to the new reality. This time of uncertainty and change. And as you know, it can change from day to day, week to week. So how do we adapt and how do we adjust? How do we show flexibility and grace during such a time as this? And so board members have shared some of their thoughts, and I believe the officers wanted it to be a discussion as a whole. And I'll just share a little bit of some of the thoughts. That prioritizing, given the current reality, make sure the highest priority work is done, make sure the requests have a clear tie to board governance, maintain normalcy, and some routine and established practice, but allow flexibility to the superintendent. Understanding what happens when a request is made, the staff have the ability to fulfill the request, or do they have to rely on the expertise of a consultant, which they charge us? So there's a cost sometimes involved. Board members wanted to share that. And so that is really what lessons can we learn from this, because this may happen again, as one of the board members shared. And so when we have a totally new change and direction for our work, how do we then adapt together as superintendent and board? So, Chair, I'll turn it over to you.
So, okay. So Teresa, you're basically looking for guidance from us in terms of what you just outlined?
So I think when we discussed that, just wanted to have clarity among the 7 board members. So I think just as I said, how do we adjust to this new reality and being still getting information, but I think a couple of points were what happens when a request is made.
And what kind of request is it? I mean, I know that we
Yeah.
kind of had a confluence of COVID and budget all at the same time, and neither one could really be ignored, right? And that probably was the most challenging situation for you and your team. So board members, any comments as far as your thoughts and on what Dr. Battle just outlined? Dee Dee.
Well, it would be my thinking that if I had a request, that I would forward it to the superintendent and copy it with a copy. Well, actually, I'd forward it through the board chair, and that the board would know of that request, and then the answer would be sent to the board. That it wouldn't be a single request from me to the superintendent, unless it was a very narrow kind of thing that I would talk to the superintendent about, that had security kinds of things related to it, but an issue related to the budget or an issue related to relationships with our employee groups or those kinds of things, I would either go through the board chair, or if I sent my request to the superintendent, I'd be copying it to the full board. We're at the 60,000 feet, using that airplane example, at 60,000 feet level. We don't need to be in the weeds. That letter you sent, Abigail, was fabulous, reminding us that, you know, there's work done by the administrators. We don't get involved in that. That was a tough lesson for me when I first joined the board. I came out of administration and I had to work hard to make sure I didn't do administrative work as a board member. And I still fall into traps where I want to go to the administrators, and not as a board member. So that's what I need to caution us all about, that if there's an issue, we need to treat it as if we're a board member. And I know Lisa's been very good, that if she gets a board member, and we're all learners. I mean, some of us haven't been on the board as long as others. And she typically responds then to all of us if she happens to get a inquiry from a board member. But I think one of the best lessons to learn, and I've had to learn those lessons myself, is if we have a question, the whole, really, we're one of 7, but we're the board, and we can't forget that. Anyway, that's my 2 bits on that.
So big bucket sharing in terms of individual questions, kind of like what we did during the school closure conversations, where we had that one collective document that had all of our questions and all of the responses within it. I'm seeing head nods. Okay. Thank you, Dee Dee. Scott?
I think what your summary started to answer my clarification. I guess from my perspective, if I'm asking for information and it's going to take somebody 10 hours of work to get it, it's okay to tell me no, or to say, can we get you this instead? Is it like, what is it like, to dig in deeper to find out exactly what it is that we were like the earlier conversation we just had about the budget reports. Once we talked it through, some of the things that we talked about, we decided maybe that's not exactly the right way to do it. So I think if I ever ask for something that's going to take a huge staff amount of time, more so than the value you'd get by providing the information, let's talk it through and see if there's a better way to get the questions answered that's going to take up less time. So that's just my thought, I guess, at this point.
Because we might not know in asking a particular question what time is involved behind the scenes.
Absolutely. Right. Like I may just ask a question and think, oh, that'll take 5 minutes, and turns out it takes 5 hours. If it takes 5 hours, I don't need to know the answer that bad, most likely.
So it's okay to say no, or to talk about the time component versus the need or value of the expected outcome.
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, this is, I'll just point out, just to echo on that real quick. This is something, I mean, I've had to learn over years of corporate work and having a job where I have someone I report to, but I often have C-level people stop in and ask me for something without, any jumping lanes and coming on in my office. And you got to learn, and I've experienced this with working with board or with different superintendent staff also. So I think the message, Dr. Battle, to your staff needs to be, make sure there's no harm in clarifying with us exactly what the goal is, what timelines involved, the scope of the work, the expected turnaround, and there's, we're never expecting you to produce a Cadillac, overnight. So sometimes managing the expectation can really shelve it down considerably, as long as you just get to what is you really want to know about. So have a little conversation, and then, oh, hey, you know what? I have a report already that does that. Let me just go get that for you and send it to you.
Good point. Thank you, Eric. Leslie, you had your hand up? You're muted.
I put my hand down and then didn't hit mute. So I was going to go off of what Scott said too. I think some of it's going to be on us as well, for us to state whether if this is urgent, I need it because we have a decision we're trying to make as a board tomorrow. So this is going to be helpful information for me to make the decision, or is this just going to be helpful information for me to understand something, therefore the urgency may not be there, so I think it's also on us to clarify how soon we would appreciate the information, and then hearing from them too, well, this actually is going to take 10 hours of my time to actually try to produce it, You know, is there, you know, do you need that within that, you know, time frame or not? You know, and how do we work together about it? Yeah. I don't think, yeah, I think there just needs to be that open communication. I think there might be, I don't know if people operate on the fear of a person's title, which means because we're a board member asking for it, they need to drop everything and do what we ask. I think that there needs to be some reasonability within that we might just be gathering information because we might need to help educate ourselves better, and we need to clarify that, but it might not be the way that we need that information.
Good point. Thank you, Leslie. Dee Dee, did you have your hand up again?
Yes, I did. Luckily for our newer board members, Abigail, they have you and I to come to with this particular point, because Abigail and I have talked about this, going to principals, where if you have children in schools, and you do, I've been on the side where I've had board members come to me as a principal, and really they should have gone through the superintendent and done the question that way rather than go to the principal. And of course they learned. And if you want more information on that one, talk to Dan Luth. And Abigail and I have talked about that. It's a learning curve. Sometimes when you're in a parent-teacher conference, and Abigail, you can talk about that when you're in a parent-teacher conference and a teacher asks you a question about board work, and there you are as a board member, and you have to respond to it. I don't know if you want to add to that, Abigail, but I've had the experience as a principal of board members calling me and skipping the superintendent and doing that kind of thing, or being caught in a situation like that. But Abigail, if you want to mention what you've been through.
Sure. So it's, you never want to put people off, and you don't want to be rude. And at the same time, I understand it's difficult. You know, we all know, the seven of us know that we wear different hats. And speaking for myself, I have the board member hat and the parent hat, and I try my best to keep those two separate. And people don't always let us do that, and that's fine. But as board members, you know, we really do need to work through the superintendent, and I know that all of us are doing a great job with that. I mean, just differentiating between the parent and the board hats. And you know, there are times when you know, I may be with my child and a teacher pulls me into my board hat, and it is kind of awkward because I don't want to be rude, and I know that they're asking from a place of good intent. So, you know, sometimes, you know, that kind of drifting does happen, and that's just, you know, that's just part of our role as board members and parents. Thank you for that, Dee Dee. And also, I think going back to Leslie, your comment, you know, recognizing, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head in terms of, you know, staff shouldn't allow the title, you know, Teresa, Dr. Battle, you and your team shouldn't necessarily have the title of board chair or board director or whatever get in the way of the reality of the work that needs to be done and the time that we do or don't have to do it. I think recognizing that we all work on the same team, we are all here for our students, and it's not a matter of us and them, it's a matter of we all and what we're doing for our students. So if something that we are requesting needs more time, then be open about that. At the same time, I think the onus is also on us in terms of looking ahead to board meetings. If we know, there's a certain amount of preparation that has to happen in advance so that, when those questions do come up, and I know they come up for me all the time, I try to prepare far enough in advance out of respect for Dr. Battle and her team so that then the information that I need to make to make my decision isn't creating a problem for them, knowing that my questions are specifically for Thursday night's meeting. So, there's kind of a balance there too. Anyone else? Dr. Battle, has this been helpful?
Yes, it's been very helpful. It's interesting, as you know, I've been involved in several professional development opportunities and mentorship because this is my first year. And I think this year has been unusual. Many superintendents tell me the work that I've done, some of them don't do in 5 years, but it's interesting when they take a time study. They say board members, superintendents should be spending 25% of their time in board relations, conversations. And so I think as going forward, I need to also take a look at that. Because of course, because we've had really major items related to governance. And so it's been a lot more than that. I understand. We've just really had some really consequential things to address this year. So I think I also need to, and I thank you for the feedback, to be honest when it is, it's interrupting some of the day-to-day and it's asking staff to take away from another priority. And so those tips and guidance that you gave is really helpful. The grace to say, what do you really need? Connecting it to board governance. So thank you. So yes, it did.
And I think the one last clarification, and I think Eric, you called this out, was also, just the budget. Budget is probably one of the biggest projects that we work on together. And we have a very finite amount of time if we're going to respect the amount of follow through time that's needed. So hopefully, what we experienced this year will, with the amount of time and work that's needed, will just be a unique year. All right, next, I will turn it over to Darcy. We're going to discuss, review information for prospective school board members. Darcy.
In preparation for the upcoming election cycle, knowing that we will hopefully have people interested in participating in the school board election, knowing there'll be at least one position open starting for the fall or for next year, that we wanted to make sure that, and kind of tying back to the work that we did with the onboarding of Leslie and Scott and Jen, to make sure that people knew at least something about what the job was about and what to expect as they made preparations and plans for running for the school board. And so not about the election or anything like that, but really what are the time commitment expectations, how, what kinds of meetings there are, what kind of preparation, reading time, going over board materials, things like that. So just so people went into the role with eyes wide open, rather than get into the position, be elected, and being frustrated, discouraged because it was way more of a time commitment than they felt they could do, or it was they didn't really understand how many meetings they'd have, how much prep they would have, what overall their responsibilities were. And so this is the document that's in the packet that I put together. It's taken very heavily from some of the onboarding work that we did with Scott and Jen and Leslie. But then in a little more high level or generalized view, because there's a lot that we told you guys that the public doesn't need to know until they go through the formal orientation and onboarding. So it's 3 pages and covers everything from meeting expectations, how many meetings there are, that you have to read the meeting materials and prep. There's gonna be a lot of events that you are expected to go to, school events and district events as well. And then a section on communications from the public and social media. So again, so that people went into it with the understanding that rarely will they get emails when people love what they are doing. They will hear from the public most often when someone dislikes what they're doing, and it might be a lot of people and it might be people they know. And just so, again, just managing those expectations as they go into it. A little section on governance versus management. If they have not served on a board in the past, that could be a difficult, Dee Dee alluded to that a little earlier this evening. It can be difficult to understand the difference between governance versus management, that as much as you are passionate about an event or something that should be changed or something that you'd like to see change, that there's a lot that falls outside of the purview of the school board itself. I generally tell my kids that they should talk to somebody that has some power and influence rather than me for the topic that they would like changed, because that's generally the people in the buildings. That's who they should talk to, but we get a lot of communications from the public that are outside of our purview, and so some general information about governance versus management, a little blurb about confidentiality, which is important. And then the bit at the end of that this kind of tying back into, this is a 7 who work as one, but it's also, it's your other 6 board members who understand the challenges of the position. And so leaning on other people to, when you're struggling, when you're trying to learn, when something is frustrated, there are 6 other people who know exactly how you feel in this role. So the idea of this document would be that it would be available on our district website, as well as a handout in physical form in the district office. So if people came into file or came into questions, that would be a resource that they'd be able to take away with them as well. And we worked hard to make sure the tone was impartial but truthful and fair about the challenges of the position and the responsibilities and the role itself. And it's not intended to discourage anyone from running, but really, actually, it's designed to set people up for success in the role, because they're going to go into it with full information about the commitments and time and responsibilities. So I guess what we're looking for tonight is, you've had a chance to look over it. Some of you have seen it more than once and helped with it, and I appreciate that. But it's really is there anything else we should add, tweak? It's already 3 pages. We're trying to keep it, well, there's no point in keeping it, we can't really keep it brief now. It's already 3 pages, but at least to keep it in a consumable format for a member of the public to understand. So I guess we're just looking for questions, comments, feedbacks, edit, things like that before we release it as a public document. I'm done.
Questions, comments? Jen, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say
Jen, go ahead.
thank you so much for putting that together. I wish there would have been like this before I ran. I feel like I went into it, pretty much knowing the basics, but having it laid out in such a clear format and being able to, plan a little better for those, just, those additional meetings that you might not have known about, or the committees and things like that. So just having this together, I think is just going to be super helpful.
Great, thank you, Jen. Eric?
Well,
Go ahead, Eric.
first and foremost, I would like to say thank you. Oop, I was off mute. Am I not off mute? Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
We can hear you.
Yep.
We hear you. We hear you.
Okay. First and foremost, say thank you to Darcy for the work on this. Yeah, it's excellent. This is the kind of thing you need to get out there. One, maybe just I would think about adding is at the end, because we've been very frank, which could be interpreted as maybe I'm not going to say negative, but it's very forthright, and so maybe just a closing statement on the rewards of doing the job, some degree, just a statement that it is for all the work demonstrated here. It is a rewarding role, and provides an opportunity to connect with the community, and maybe a comment about being involved in graduation or something to that effect. I don't know. I didn't read close enough to see, maybe you already have that in there, but just something about a couple of the rewarding points of serving in the office.
I see heads nodding. Dee Dee?
Sorry, the very last paragraph under training and support does say is a challenging and rewarding, but I can beef up rewarding. There's some space there.
On the part where it says the board meets the second and fourth Thursdays, this year we've been all over the calendar in our meetings. So I'm wondering if we should say something like we have 2 regular meetings a month on Thursdays or something like that, because I just went through the calendar, and sometimes we met the 1st and 3rd on some months, and plus we added lots of special meetings. So I don't know if we've been as regular on the 2nd and 4th. That's what we typically have done in the past, but I don't know. This past year.
I wonder if it's also having a link to the board calendar.
What did you say, Abigail?
Maybe having a link to the board calendar. I know we haven't been regular. You're absolutely right. This has been a very irregular year.
Right. But we typically meet on Thursdays.
Yeah, and I would say that we're irregular even with spring break too. So it's on those where there's breaks built in for school, that we are like that 1st and 3rd or 2nd and 3rd, or
or even like 2nd. Yeah, right. 2nd and 3rd. Yeah.
So again, just in the interest of giving people some sort of information, just to tell them that there's 2 regular board meetings a month, and they occur on Thursdays. Because if you're on another nonprofit board, or you're on you have some sort of commitments, and they're always on Thursdays, then this maybe is not the right time for you to do this. But even if we just said 2 regular board meetings on Thursdays a month and didn't do how about that? Would that satisfy the?
Yeah. Good idea.
Eric, I see your hand up. Nope. Okay. Anybody else? Dee Dee, was your hand back up? Nope. Got it. Yeah, I'd like to thank you very much, Darcy, and thanks to everyone who helped bring this this overview to us. I know Scott, Jen, and Leslie, you were helpful as Darcy was working through this, and feeling really good about at least being having potential candidates understanding a little bit more about what it is that we do and the frequency that we do it with. So Darcy, I guess what we can do is, just, do you want to make the changes to the document and then just share it back to Dr. Battle?
Yep, I will make these two updates and then send it back to you, Teresa, and then you can work with your team to format it and brand it and things like that, and then we'll leave it to you to have on the website in a prominent, appropriately sectioned position, as well as available for handout. And I guess ideally, as we head into August, when filings open in August, or even in July, that people are made aware that this document exists, because it's brand new. They'll never know to look for it if we don't tell them that it exists. And so we might have some communications that go out to our public with this information as well.
And one suggestion too, Darcy, you just reminded me, do we want people who do file to automatically receive this as an email? Or receive an email with a link to the document?
I would
So don't
say
you have to
yes.
file
I
in
was
person,
actually wondering.
Jamie?
I seem. Yeah, I remember getting a packet. I don't remember what was in it, but I got a packet when I signed up
Yeah,
to run.
I think you have to.
and
Yeah.
Including it in that packet would be ideal, I think, and then everybody gets it.
Okay. Okay. So.
But it should
Teresa,
also be on the website.
Yeah. So yeah, and even just available in general if people aren't going to file, and in any time in the next few months, if they're even considering running for the board, then this should be available. If they stop into the office and say, I'd like to see a copy of this, as well as on the website, but certainly including it in the packet makes great sense. Okay, but I would still like to see some general communications about it, so that people even know that it does exist, before filing.
Well, and I think there are, if I remember correctly, the communications department does communicate pretty regularly leading up to the filing window and throughout the filing window. So that'll be a good place to include. By the way, if you're looking for more information, here's this information.
Perfect. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, so our last topic. Last topic is a COVID-19 check-in, and we'll start with Dr. Battle. Dr. Battle, I wasn't sure if there was anything in particular you wanted to start us off with.
So on next week's board agenda, Lisa Ryder, Stacy Sovine, and I will be giving an update on what we know at this point in time of the financial impact of COVID-19, the distance learning, the meal distribution, and the child care. And so you have received information from MSBA as well as AMSD. And so just wanted to see if you had specific questions As some board members have noted, the session closes May 18th. And so we'll get more final information. I think the general consensus was that we want to make sure that we're getting the money we were expected to get, as the legislature had given us for this second part of the 2-year cycle. But then how are we going to be reimbursed for some of our costs? And so this was just an opportunity if you had specific questions that you want the 3 of us to address next week.
I'll open it up for questions. Thank you. Or comments. Okay. I think we know we have a lot of information that we're going to receive on May 14th from you. I guess my only comment is the, really the concern that we know we have in terms of the mandate to continue to pay hourly employees, but the funding streams might not be there. Which would lead us into deficit spending. So that's just something that I'm concerned about. And one last.
Thank you, Cheryl.
All right. Thank you all very much. Really good
Great.
conversation tonight. Yeah. And we will look forward to seeing everyone next Thursday. Have a good evening.
Good night.
Bye. Good night.